It's the Global Thought Leader Insights. Brilliant thinking implemented. Brought to you by Internal Consulting Group. I'm Mark S.A. Smith. As a leader of your company, you must stay on top of your industry or risk obsolescence. This can be a daunting task. Get ready to solve your biggest challenges and learn how to capitalize on your biggest opportunities after this. Executives depend on external advisors to fill knowledge and experience gaps, to help them make a case for change, or to have an experienced mind audit their thinking. Internal Consulting Group brings together a wide range of proven thought leaders from around the globe and makes them available to you. Get access to insights, advice, and the tools you need to succeed. Learn more at internalconsulting.com. Our guest today is Alain Meloche, who is an expert at pricing. He is the practice leader of strategic pricing at the Internal Consulting Group. He has an interesting background. He has a degree in nuclear engineering, a Master of Business Administration from Harvard Business School, and has been helping people figure out how to come up with the right prices for, coming up on 2 decades. Welcome, Alain.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And we've got a lot of interesting ideas because pricing is a mystery for a lot of people. And if you get it right, it can make you a lot of money. And if you get it wrong, it can cost you a lot of money. And it's been estimated that you've helped add more than $200 million worth of profits by picking the right price.
Yep.
So how do we go about doing this to make money? Get it right.
Well, it's pricing has a whole bunch of components involved in it. And a lot of people just view it as, no big deal. Pricing, I'll just set a price. It'll be to meet whatever the competition is charging. And you know what? I'm going to price so that I win a particular deal. Well, that's kind of a race to the bottom when you do that kind of thing, because everybody is trying to jiggle around with each other and price lower and lower and lower. So, that's the road to hell. And if you're thinking about pricing, what you really want to do is figure out what are my strategic objectives? What are my goals when I'm doing pricing? And that, really demonstrates the importance of tying in your price to your corporate objectives. And
so you mean the strategy shouldn't just be to win the deal?
Not exactly. We've seen this so many times over the years where I've been working, and everybody says, you talk to a sales guy and they will always say, this deal is unique, absolutely unique. It's different from all the others. We got to win this. We got to price this way. We got to get this deal. And so what you're seeing when you do that kind of thing is a huge number of inconsistencies in the price that are being charged to comparable customers. Indeed. So one of the things that we do when, want to start off and kind of snap people awake is to do a simple analysis. And what you do is you look at what's called the net price, and I'll explain that in a second. You look at the net price compared to, let's say, a simple metric like the volume of sales. So what you do when you plot that out is that you'll find, for example, that you're going to get some customers who are like really low volume folks getting really, really good prices. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum, on your x-axis and volume, big volumes, those customers may actually have a higher price than the ones that are low volume.
Yeah, it's insane. The 80-20 rule comes into play here oftentimes.
Yeah, so when you do that, and you do that simple example and analysis, everybody goes, oh, we kind of thought that was the case. And intuitively, we knew that was the case. Thanks for, showing this to us. And then you take it from there.
And one of the things that is interesting is specifically in the world of technology, you have companies like the Gartner Group that tattle on how much you paid for it.
Yes.
So if you would do a low ball deal, sweetheart deal to somebody, everybody else in the world's going to know about it because of what they do from a consulting situation.
Absolutely. There's a huge change that is occurring in the marketplace, and that is technology,
Hmm.
which is making prices more and more visible.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, we can talk about, the classic online marketers, that kind of thing. But even if you're talking about B2B businesses, a lot of your clients, if you're in B2B, they will have access to all these prices that are being offered online, and they'll
Hmm.
have access to what they got from somebody else. So you can run, but you can't hide.
And I call that frugaling. You go on Google and find out what everybody else is selling it for.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. No, there's no doubt. And you go, well, it's you can find what these prices are, but then there's the other aspect in B2B where you can negotiate down.
Of course.
And there are more and more pressures on companies, procurement groups, to be very, very demanding in terms of the prices that they get. They get rewarded on the amount of a discount that they get from you.
Right. Their job is to do one thing, take the profit out of the deal.
Yep, absolutely.
It's really sick. And a lot of people think that procurement's job is to get the lowest price. No, procurement's job is to get it in stock at
Yep.
the lowest price.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's always the temptation. Again, we go back to the salesperson who's saying, "Oh, well, we absolutely need this deal."
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a company, what you really have to do is understand, why do we want to get this deal? We go back to the strategic objective of getting a particular deal.
Mm-hmm.
What's that deal worth to you? You know, you probably, many listeners have heard of the whole idea of value-based pricing.
Sure.
And so you're talking about, what is the value that our product provides to the buyer? That's classic stuff. But what a lot of people don't look at systematically is, what is the value of the deal to us?
Right on.
So we had a client some time ago, and they were introducing new DNA-based testing kits, and that was brand new in the marketplace. And they were trying to understand, well, how are we going to price these things, because it's brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we did is we tried to identify, what are the attributes of value to the customer? For example, the large research hospitals, that kind of thing, or the reference labs and all that kind of stuff. So what we did is we worked with the client to identify, what are the attributes that people are looking at. Well, there are two elements. One is revenue generation, and you can break that down into a whole bunch of little subgroups, and cost reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, there are a whole bunch of little sub-attributes to that. Mm-hmm. And then what we did is we worked with the team to figure out, okay, what's the importance of each one of those things depending upon who the customer is. So research labs or hospitals will look at things differently. They'll weigh things differently from the other guys. So that was one element. But then they said, okay, so we want to get into these markets. What's the value to us of selling this? So what they looked at, again, same thing, revenue generation, cost reduction. And they said, okay, so what are the elements of revenue generation that we can get? Well, it's just the pure sales of this item. It's an entry into this client and the potential for other sales, blah, 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 blah. You go on like that. And what you can do is you can actually quantify what that's worth to you for segments, and within those segments for particular customers themselves. So what that does is that gives you really good guidelines as to how much of a discount you should be prepared to offer. And it's a great guideline for your sales organization. It's a discipline that you're providing them.
I think that's a really important point. It is a discipline, because every deal needs to be either profitable or strategic.
Yes. Yeah.
And the point here is, let's make sure that the discount is a strategic concept.
Absolutely.
Yet I believe, even more importantly, let's make sure the price is set right, so discounts become maybe more of a negotiation approach versus a go-to-market approach.
Exactly, exactly. So again, what they did, the go-to-market approach, what this company did was to say, okay, what's the incremental value of our product compared to the tests that exist right now? And what should be the incremental price that we charge given that incremental value? And you start from there. This is what we offer. This is, what the client gets by, taking on our product. One of the issues, so you start from there. But one of the other issues is, okay, so if you're saying I'm taking all of the incremental value that I'm providing to the client, what's the point to the client of buying your product? Because you're taking everything back that you offered to them. So you got to figure out, like, what can we do? How can we share in the value that we're providing? And that's quite a set of discussions that people will have within a company, especially when a new product is being offered and
Indeed.
provided.
Yeah, especially when we're cracking into a new market, one of our advantages, of course, is first mover,
Right.
because we can have a massive impact on our marketplace, and we see this all the time. For example, Uber. Uber was a first mover; everybody else is trying to catch up,
That's right.
and
Absolutely.
it doesn't really matter. So, what's the approach that you take for pricing? How do we come up with the right price? You've talked about value to the organization, value to the customer.
Hmm.
And so walk through for me how you come up with doing this.
Well, the view that take on is that there are two basic components to pricing. One is your pricing activities, so that talks to the strategy. What do we want to achieve with our
Mhm.
prices? And the next component of these pricing activities is the implementation of that strategy. So,
Aha.
how do we set the prices that will match, you know, uh, and help implement our pricing strategy? The other component then is, okay, you've got your list prices, you've got the structures, you've got the levels, that kind of thing. Then, okay, so you're going out in the field. And so then you're quoting a price. Like, what are the prices that we're offering? And again, what we're doing, as I said before, is to balance the individual quote with the corporate objectives. The next step, of course, is to negotiate those prices.
Hmm.
And this is where it's important, and we were alluding to this before in our conversation, is to make sure that the sales organization has an understanding of what the flexibility is, what they can do. So what we do is we call those things price guardrails. So there's an upper limit and then there's a lower limit. And if you're trying to go below that, limit of price, you got to have a process that allows you within the organization to talk to other people and to get some decision makers that provide these exceptions.
Indeed. And what I've seen is a lot of this is sales cultural.
Yes.
In some sales cultures, discounting is part of the strategy. In
Right.
others, staying focused on value is
Right.
part of the strategy. And also, I think a big part of it has to do with how the salespeople are compensated.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. You want a system that rewards the behaviors that will be consistent with what your corporate goals are. And that's a huge issue.
Hmm.
Frequently, and organizations classically will just reward them on, you know, sales volumes, so on and so forth, and not really have incremental incentives for these people to achieve these profitability goals or market share penetration goals or whatever. They're not explicitly tied in to the goals that we have as an organization. That's a critical point.
And it screws up all the pricing strategy.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And what you get is exactly what I was talking about before, where you have this scatter plot that is almost random in terms of the price that people get at the end of the day.
Indeed.
Because you're not incentivizing, you're not, guiding the behavior of your sales people to be consistent with what your objectives are. Frequently, people don't in companies don't even have a clue as to what's going on, except for a generalized sense that something is really wrong. We're giving away too many things.
Hmm.
So that's the negotiating aspect. And the other one is to ensure that you've got that price discipline that we were talking about before. So, you got to collect the results, what's happened, Again, getting back to my scatter plot as a simple example, and you look, okay, why are these people doing these things? What are the implications? How then do we change the behaviors? And we feed that back into the development of the strategy and the setting of prices. So it's like a cyclical piece. So we spoke about pricing activities, which is, here's what you do in pricing. But then the other big aspect to that component of pricing is the infrastructure and the support behind, carrying out those pricing activities. So, there's some four basic elements that we look at are the policies and processes. What are the guidelines for making the pricing decisions? Big issue now is data management and IT. So much has changed in terms of the technology that is becoming more and more central to organizations when they do the pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other two elements are organizational structure, which is classic for, all activities that you carry out in companies. And the other one are, we've alluded to this, what are the people and the skills that you've got? What are the capabilities as you're changing, and evolving with the marketplace? Do your people have the capabilities to do what you want them to do? What do you have to do? Do you have to train them? Do you have to find new people? What are the elements that you need to carry out to support those pricing activities? So that's it. Again, pricing activities and infrastructure and support.
We'll be back with more after this. The world is moving fast. It's difficult to keep up. Your executive team needs new ideas to keep them ahead of the competition. Download and share the Internal Consulting Group's monthly executive magazine, The Insights Review. Every issue includes thought leadership and ideas that you can leverage to solve issues and harvest opportunities facing you. Get your complimentary copy from internalconsulting.com/publications. A big part of this is about business rules.
Yes.
And not strategic business rules, tactical business rules.
Right.
And then as we've also dialed in here, there's this cultural aspect to it.
Oh, it's huge.
And today we're going through a lot of forces are coming at us to reduce prices everywhere we can, thanks to things such as Moore's law and technology, where technology gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for a given capability.
Right.
And then the other aspect of that is just the maturity of companies coming at this pricing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've done a lot of work around identifying where a company is as far as their maturity and understanding how to price.
Right.
Share with our listeners some insights around your experience in company maturity and integrating all these elements.
Right. So what we do is we look at what a company does and we break that down into these different components that I spoke about and break it down further. And we try to understand, what is the performance level that companies have relative to each of these? So, you go at the low end, we don't do this at all, to the high end, like we're kind of world class.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not the only ones. There have been a lot of studies that have been carried out along these lines. And what all the researchers and what we have found is that most companies are, at the very bottom level, and we would say that they have ineffective pricing processes, where pricing is ad hoc, there's no specific pricing strategy, and pricing is based, on previous prices. That's one of the curses of pricing. It's like legacy pricing. People are afraid to move away from the prices that have been charged in the past, and it's like, oh no, we're afraid. We're really afraid to increase prices.
Yep.
And again, that one fellow that we all know, Warren Buffett, I think, has captured that quite well. And he said, if you have to hold a prayer session before raising your prices by 10%, then you've got a terrible business.
That would be a terrible business. A lot of people at that level also work at cost plus.
Absolutely.
Which means that they are at the mercy of their suppliers.
Totally. And you think that Apple does cost plus? I don't think so.
Not only no, hell no.
No.
Do you ever see Apple products on sale?
No, you don't.
Never.
No.
Do you ever see Samsung products on sale?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Completely different pricing and go-to-market strategies. So what percentage of customers do you see or companies do you see that are at that ineffective pricing level?
It's around a quarter of
Wow.
companies that are at that lower level. And I think that that's being generous. There have been some other estimates from other researchers that have seen it as low as 15%.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that again, we are talking about the dark ages here.
Yeah. Well,
That a lot of companies have, despite all the talk that we have about digitization, about all these things that are happening, a lot of companies are still at that very baseline. It's either cost plus or gut.
well, these are the companies that get disrupted. Half the Fortune 500 rolls over every
Yeah,
10 years.
that's right.
It's expected right now that 75% of the Standard & Poor's 500 will not make it past 2027.
Hmm.
And this is certainly one of the key reasons is they're pricing themselves out of business.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely,
what's
and you're seeing new competitors coming in all the time that are
so
offering
what
alternative ways of providing these products and services.
indeed disruption.
And so their cost system, yeah, is not the same as these classic competitors. So if you're doing cost plus, then you're, again, pricing yourself out of the market, and you're not responding to changes that are occurring in the
So,
marketplace.
Alan, we've got about a quarter of our listeners that are going, "Oh my gosh, what do I do?" What's the next level up in this maturity of pricing?
Well, the next one that we see is, it's customer and competitor reactive
Hmm.
pricing. And we spoke about this before, and it's pricing that's based on the need to win
Oh
the
yeah,
deal. And all those deals are special and unique. No, they're not. And so what you're seeing are these broad margin variances that I spoke about. And we're seeing that, 20% of the companies are at that
Hmm.
level. So between level number one and level number two, we're talking about 50% of companies that are at the very lower levels in terms of pricing.
And at total risk of being disrupted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, dangerous.
Again, if it's competitive reactive pricing, we just spoke about that, you're getting a new group of competitors. You can't, they're going to eat your
That's
lunch
right.
unless you really know strategically what you want to achieve with your pricing.
All right. So half of our listeners now are going, "All right, Alan, help me out. How do I improve my 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 growing up a little bit here with my pricing strategy? How can I improve my maturity?"
Right,
What's next? What's the next one?
right. Oh, the next one is, you've got pricing and controls where controls are in place where you've got robust systems and processes that are in place to minimize unjustified deviations from list prices. And again, this is where technology can come in. And doing something like that is not that sophisticated technologically, but it's using simple tools that we have in technology, even if it's looking at Excel spreadsheets and really understanding how, what you're going to measure and how you're going to use even those little Excel spreadsheets to create dashboards to understand what's happening. Why are we doing this? Why are things deviating so much from list prices? I might have, salesperson A who's constantly discounting drastically compared to salesperson C, who's actually maintaining these prices, fairly well and not discounting too much. So you can do an analysis and look at what's going on within your organization. Again, it doesn't have to be that complicated. And here, what you might have at this level, again, is unsophisticated methods to set your list prices.
But at least we have some controls in place. So this is a sort of the initial stage of maturity where we're starting to
Yeah,
gain some control here.
absolutely. You've begun to understand what is going on and to, as you say, establish some controls over what's going on.
Hmm.
And, that's about 20%. So we're now up to about 70% of companies that are in those first three levels. Now, mind you, there's a total of seven levels. So we're just
Hmm.
talking 70% of companies that are at the lower three.
So the next few levels are rarefied air, and if you can do these things, you're going to create extraordinary business advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're talking about the next one is strategically and analytically driven pricing. And with all the data that's coming in now, you can understand, you can develop some algorithms that will help you forecast how your customers are going to respond to your prices. And it's called price
Indeed.
elasticity. And you start to do that.
Right. Well, we can use the 80-20 rule where 20% of our customers are willing to pay more.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there was a Bourdain once said that when he was selling cocaine, they were having a great market for the cocaine because he was charging a lot. And then when he went into the food business, they were really, really floundering. No pun intended. But he used the cocaine model, and they raised their prices. And as soon as they raised their prices, business flourished. And so, people were prepared to pay for this because there's a
Indeed.
natural
Yes.
assumption. If you're paying more, you got more value.
That's exactly right. Cialdini, in his book Influence the Psychology of Persuasion,
Right.
quotes a number of extraordinary studies about increasing the price, increase the sales velocity.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's that
Absolutely.
strategic and analytically driven pricing.
Oh, for sure.
And about what percentage of the folks do you work with are about that level?
About 10%.
Aha. It is rarefied
So,
air indeed.
yeah, we're getting fairly small, 10, 15%. And then you're looking at, value-based pricing, which is the next level. It reflects, segmented willingness to pay based on the benefits provided. And that's one of the big issues. A lot of companies really don't have segmentation models.
Is this the idea good, better, best?
Yeah, kind of. But what you're looking at is to look at the characteristics of your customers that will be correlated to the way that they respond to price.
So this is Timex versus Rolex.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's exactly
All right.
a
They both tell
good
the
way
time.
of putting it. But something like this is a little bit trickier to apply. Obviously, fewer companies apply this because value, especially in a consumer market, is something that is difficult to really pinpoint. And there are a number of elements that go into value.
It's a moving target.
Classic example. I don't know if you remember this. Years ago, Volkswagen decided to introduce the Volkswagen Phaeton. Do you remember that?
I don't remember the fighting. Those are fighting words. Bring it on. Tell me
Yeah,
the story.
they are fighting words, and they got fighting down. But what happened was that the product was developed by a bunch of engineers at Volkswagen who really thought that value came from engineering quality of the product, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? They were priced relatively similarly to BMW 5 and the Mercedes E-Series. So, we're talking about consumers, and they had a very different perception of what value was.
Yeah, that's right.
So when they looked at the fight and they said, no, I don't think so. It's not exactly the same. So they looked at brand value. They looked at, the name of the company, and they looked also in terms of the overall product portfolio that BMW and Mercedes had relative to Volkswagen. The Phaeton was like way out of where, the area of the general Volkswagen vehicles were. So that was so totally inconsistent with the market positioning of Volkswagen. Well, guess what? None of those guys are around anymore. CEO got, turfed in no time. His whole team got turfed. Now, there's another team that came in, and we're talking about emissions and diesels, but that's another question.
That's right.
But in this particular case, that is what happened.
That's a great example of where the leadership did not understand a pricing or positioning strategy.
Exactly. They had different. You have to be very careful as to what are the attributes that go in to defining value. Now, in a sense, it's easier in B2B because you can say, okay, here are the benefits: cost reduction, revenue increases, blah 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 blah. But even in that case, you got to be careful because, given the example that I mentioned before, you had, the research hospitals like the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, those kinds of things, compared to reference labs. And reference labs, it was like lower the cost, blah, 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 blah. For the Mayo Clinic in Cleveland, it's like using this equipment, to develop more sophisticated and more precise results. So they ascribed a different weighting to these different elements of value.
Well, in these particular
So even in
cases,
B2B,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
their customers have completely different expectations. And
Absolutely.
for example, with the fighting example that you just gave, people have a customer experience expectation from
Yes,
Mercedes and BMW that the Volkswagen dealership just can't deliver.
exactly. Exactly. And people are going like, an $80,000 Volkswagen compared to the average of $30,000.
Yeah,
It's like completely different from the rest of the portfolio.
indeed.
So if you're going to make a big change in the pricing and offer a new element to your portfolio, you've got to be creating a different brand
Right on.
to justify those prices. And you see that with Toyota,
Sure.
with the Lexus. So they've got a different name. So they were able to change the pricing levels of those particular products
And they have
compared to the regular Toyota brand.
a completely different dealership stream, so it's a different
Totally.
customer. Although if you pop open
Absolutely.
your Lexus hood, there's Toyota branded parts in there.
You betcha. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's value driven pricing. What
Right.
percentage of the folks you work with do you see it
It's
operating about there?
it's about 10%.
All right.
So now we're getting into the upper ranges here. Like we've covered, there's about 94% of companies that are at that level or below.
Interesting.
And then if you're talking about the two upper levels, um, the the second highest level in terms of maturity is where you've got optimized pricing, you've got rules-based pricing, you've got a pricing team that's there
So
working with senior level.
is this
Mhm.
like what airlines do
Yeah,
when they're trying to maximize volume control and seat pricing, where
absolutely,
the seat
absolutely.
prices from day to day changes from day to day?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they're doing when you say, you got to be optimized is kind of a loaded word here.
Indeed.
What do you mean by optimized? In terms of the airlines, it's the load factors that are really significant for them. So that is how their optimization models work. But you might want to say, okay, if I'm introducing a new product into the marketplace, again, as this medical devices company did, you might want to say, well, we really want to get market penetration,
Mm-hmm.
and that's optimization.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're looking at optimization, again, you really have to have the responses fairly clear to be able to say, okay, if I price at this point, what will be the market's response? Will I get market share? Will I, increase the probability of win? So on and so forth. So that, is based on some fairly sophisticated analyses, data analyses, so that you can forecast what the market response is going to be, and you can optimize your price based on what you want to achieve.
Mm.
And so
Interesting.
that takes a fairly sophisticated set of processes and analytics that are in place.
Indeed.
And again, it's tied very closely to achieving corporate goals by market, by segment, by product, and so on and so forth. And that's 5%.
Hmm.
Of our base of clients that are there. So now we're up at the upper 1%
Mm-hmm.
after this point. And that's where you've got pricing excellence. You've got optimized price setting and you've got optimized price getting. So you've got, there's a culture that's dedicated to pricing. You've got sophisticated tools. You've got continuous improvement. And, what you're doing is you're really bringing together all the elements that I spoke about earlier. And what you do is you really look at this case as pricing being a process,
Mm-hmm.
not just a one term shot. It just is ongoing and it involves all the elements of the corporation.
So give me an example of a company that does this, operates at this level.
I would say that Apple,
Yeah, they pop
um,
into mind immediately.
absolutely, they're very definitely at the top of the game. Microsoft to a lesser extent, Google in terms of the new products that they're offering,
Mm-hmm.
they certainly have a strong sense. They're the big companies that use a lot of analytics. Amazon is another one that comes to mind.
Sure.
Those are the companies really where you're seeing all things, all cylinders firing at the same time,
Indeed.
involving all these processes. Now, you could say, well, yeah, they got a lot of data. True, they have a lot of data.
And they do something with it.
They do, absolutely. And that's really key. Not all companies have that, though. And so the companies that don't necessarily have that amount of data, what they really do to be at this level is that they really have a culture that's dedicated to pricing. They know what they want. All people understand what they have to do about pricing. And, you've got this attitude of a continuous improvement that goes on.
So we have listeners here now that are trying to identify where they are in this stack.
Yeah.
And I think that probably most of our listeners are somewhere in the first four, maybe up to the value-driven pricing.
Right. Yep.
And what that indicates is, listener, you probably need to have a conversation with LA.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because anything he charges you is going to be made up in better pricing.
Absolutely. Oh, the returns on pricing projects are very significant, typically 10 to 1. But if you look at, again, a lot of research that's being done by companies such as McKinsey, Deloitte, BCG, CompuStat, so on and so forth, they all find comparable results. And that is that pricing is the most significant lever that you've got in improving margins. And the research that's been done indicates that if you have a 1% improvement in pricing, it gives you an 11% improvement in your operating profit, as opposed to many of the other fixed. Yeah.
Of course, that makes complete sense, because if you can increase price and everything else remains the same, it drops straight down to your bottom line.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
That's how this number comes about.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they've done the Fortune 1000 companies, and they've done that calculation, and it does translate into approximately an 11% impact on your bottom line, as opposed to, if you're reducing your fixed costs by, let's say, 1%, that only goes to a 2.3% improvement in your bottom line. Not a lot.
It's not a lot. The ability to raise prices and make them stick is the hallmark of a company who's going to be in business, be profitable, and generate more revenue for their shareholders, without a doubt.
Absolutely. And you were mentioning how people can try to get an understanding of where they are along these maturity levels. What we do is we have ICG's got a quick pricing assessment that's online, and it takes you through the different components that I mentioned briefly during this conversation, and it asks you to evaluate how you sit on a scale of 1 to 7. And also what it does is it asks you your perceptions in terms of how important each one of these elements are to you. And that's what makes it really interesting, because, you can say, well, I rate a 7 on a particular element, but it's not that important to me. Like, okay, so who cares? Honestly. So what this tool does is it combines all of those elements, and it takes you through 28 attributes or components of your pricing processes. It takes you through that, and then it gives you an evaluation of where you lie on the maturity spectrum, and it will give you like a radar chart as to how you perform along the different dimensions. There are 8 dimensions, how you perform relative to the average companies in our database, and how you perform relative to the top 10%.
So how does somebody get a hold of that? I can hear our listener pulling over to take notes right now.
Yes. Well, what they can do, they should do, is write to me, email me, and the address is Alain, ALAIN, Meloche, and that's spelled MELOCHE, at internalconsulting.com. They send me a request, and I'll send them the link. They can take the survey, they get the result. There's like a dashboard that they obtain. And what I'll do is I'll spend 30 minutes talking with them about the results. And, this is just offered at no charge, just because.
Extremely generous of you to offer your time into this report. So, listener, my suggestion is make sure you do this. If you're responsible for profit and loss, if you're responsible for the shareholder value of your organization, take up on this extraordinary offer. This has been a fantastic conversation. Lots of interesting insights from beginning to end.
It's been great, Mark.
Thank you. And for me as well. Do you have any final thoughts for our listener before we sign off?
Yeah, well, when we discuss things all on a one-to-one basis, I can talk about, the 10 steps to get to world-class pricing. We don't have the time right now, but you'll see, it integrates what's going on in the world today with what you have to do to take advantage of, the levers like technology that you've got and how you can create that culture to provide pricing excellence. So we can talk about that when they phone me up.
Well, step one is always figure out where the hell you are.
Yeah, you got, if you got it, the first step in a journey, what is it? The beginning of a journey always involves the first step, and that's what this is.
Well, indeed, that's what the old, I think, Confucian saying is a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step, and actually that's wrong. Actually, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a direction.
Yes, you want to know where you're going.
We got to
want to have a destination.
That's exactly right, and the destination is improved profitability, more stable prices.
Yes.
And that starts with sending you an email and then having that conversation.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for being a part of the program. A real delight to have you on the show.
It's great to talk to you.
That wraps up this episode. Go to internalconsulting.com/global-thought-leaders to contact today's guest. If you like the show, share it with your executive team and review us on iTunes. This is Global Thought Leader Insights. Brilliant thinking implemented.